live.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, ever merciful. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings of Allah be upon you, dear viewers. Welcome to Nice Life online lecture organized by UK Talim Department. Tonight we have the pleasure of being joined by Ataul Fatir Tahir Sahib, Murrabi-e-Silsila, working at the Al Hakam Weekly and Al Islam website. And this evening, um, Ataul Tahir will be talking about the origins of atheism in Europe and the light from the East. As always, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. These will be put onto our Murrabi Sahib on your behalf in the last 15 minutes. Please type your questions into the live chat and kindly ensure they are relevant to tonight's topic. It gives me the pleasure to hand over to our Murrabi Sahib. I'll pass it on to the Murrabi Sahib now for the tilawat and the lecture.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذا سألك عبادي عني فإني قريب أجيب دعوة الداع إذا دعان فليستجيبوا لي وليؤمنوا بي لعلهم يرشدون. So this is a verse from Surah Al-Baqarah, and the translation of this is as follows. Allah says, and he's addressing the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and this is a very powerful verse, of course, counteracting the belief that Allah is not here, or Allah cannot talk, or Allah doesn't exist, God doesn't exist. Allah says to the Holy Prophet, and when my servants ask thee about me, say, I am near, I answer the prayer of the supplicant when he prays to me. So they should hearken to me and believe in me, that they may follow the right way. So here Allah is saying that I am near and I answer the prayer, I am living, and the believer can find my existence. Now, the topic of today is the origins of atheism in Europe and the light from the East, the antidote from the East. And this is a very interesting topic. And just as a disclaimer for everyone watching, this isn't a talk about answering atheism, right? It's just talking about the history of why today, and lots of people will be watching this who are living in the West will, why is it that our society is strongly atheistic or agnostic? People are away from religion. People talk against Islam. People talk against religion as a whole. They say God doesn't exist, and rationality prevails, or people say that nature is God, or there's all kinds of theories out there, but the element of a God who has influence over us doesn't exist. So that's the question we're going to go to. We're going to go to the history. We can go to the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century as well, but mainly focusing on the 17th century, the 18th century of Europe, and what was happening, and how suddenly, in 2020, lots of people are even discussing. There was an article out recently whether Europe is even whether Britain rather is even a Christian country anymore. So these discussions are happening everywhere, and it's very important to look into the history of what was happening, around before the French Revolution, the revolutions that happened in the West as well, the decline of the monarchies, what was happening. And there you kind of, once we study this period of history, which coincidentally, of course, which through of course Allah's divine wisdom, after which the Prophet Messiah Islam came, you will understand why atheism has prevailed across Europe. And this is a very, very long and in-depth subject, and I'm literally going to just touch a bit of it and scratch the surface. It's really just the tip of the iceberg. And if you want to do some more research into this and go into the history of the development of atheism or pure rationality, within Europe and the decline of religion, then I recommend a couple of books. The first book is The Twilight of Atheism by Alistair McGrath, who is from the University of Oxford. A very good book. The Twilight of Atheism talks about why certain people, why atheism developed within Europe, and it gives a very good overview of the whole picture. The second book, which I recommend, is Imagine There's No Heaven, Palgrave Macmillan. Again, a good book looking at the overall picture of why atheism developed, how it developed. And another two books which I recommend is, and these are if you want to go into in-depth of this, is God's Funeral by A.N. Wilson. This is a very good book giving the overview again. Again, we're going to be talking about the philosophers, we're going to talk about the rational thinkers who were going against religion, especially Christianity, who were raising lots of philosophical questions and the rise of philosophy. And these books, talk about the different philosophers like Carlyle, Kant, Voltaire. It just goes on and on. So this is a good book, God's Funeral, which talks about atheism in Europe, how it developed. Another in-depth book, which is a classic, is Bertrand Russell, History of Western Philosophy. This is a much deeper read as well, and he goes into the different philosophical ideas which were developing, especially against religion. So these are some books if you want to go deeper. Now, just to start off, looking at Europe, what we first have to remember is Europe. The Prophet Messiah says a very interesting quote. He said that Europe has always been shrouded in darkness. And that is why he said that there was a hadith of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, which said that the sun shall rise from the west again. Now, Hazrat Masih Maud said that the sun shall rise from the west means that Islam will rise from the west and true religion will be given to the Europeans who were shrouded in darkness, he said. And when you look at the history, it's true, because what we had first, we have to go to the Greeks, of course, and that was a society which was paganistic. Of course, there was, if you like, inherent atheism there as well, but it was a pagan society. There were lots of different gods, the 12 gods of the skies or the world. And what happened was, and this is a crucial point to remember, is when Constantine accepted Christianity, and of course you had the Roman Empire there, the whole of Europe was married instantly with the pagan ideals as well, because the Christianity which Europe was given wasn't the true Christianity which Hazrat Isa alayhi salam, Jesus of Nazareth, actually preached. It was Pauline Christianity. It was corrupted Christianity. And this is the Christianity which the Promised Messiah alayhi salam always theologically attacked. And he said that this wasn't true Christianity in the first place. And that's why you have all these pagan ideas of, for example, the Trinity, or even different festivals like Halloween, so on and so forth. So Europe, especially we're focusing today on France and Britain, was married with Pauline Christianity, which had adopted and then further adapted as well paganistic ideas. So this is crucial to remember. And this goes back to what the Promised Messiah ﷺ said, that Europe has always been shrouded in darkness, i.e. they were never given true divine revelation, or the true religion. And Pauline Christianity is always which the Promised Messiah ﷺ attacked theologically. And of course the Christian missionaries there as well, they were preaching Pauline Christianity. Now, so you have Constantine accepting Christianity. Of course, the Romans, they had Pauline Christianity had accepted lots of paganistic ideas. And then what happened is, over the centuries, of course, throughout Europe as well, the monarchies developed, especially in France and Britain. There was a huge control of the Christian monarchies. And so, you had the Middle Ages, the ages of darkness. And then following that, what happened is, in the 17th, 18th century, you had the Industrial Revolution, first the Enlightenment, and then the Industrial Revolution as well. Now, what was the Enlightenment? What was the Industrial Revolution? So this people say that, there's lots of different dates which are given, but generally from about 1715 to 1789, you had the Enlightenment period, the Renaissance, if you like, and that was followed by the Industrial Revolution. And that was a period where you had lots of people, philosophers, thinkers coming forward and actually attacking theologically Christianity. And this has a history before as well, because you had the age where there was the development of science, Copernicus, speaking about the heliocentric universe, going against the Bible, of course, then Galileo as well, and then them being attacked by the Christian monarchies, and lots of people being burnt at the stake. But that basically followed on, and then with the development of science through the Enlightenment, through the study of the world, and then also with the Industrial Revolution, you had better machinery, you had people, traveling better, the introduction of the steam engine, so on and so forth. So this was the period in which there was a huge dynamic shift within the religion of Europe. And I'm going to talk about that in depth and talk about some philosophers as well who came during this time, and they started and talk about how they started to dismantle religion, or the religion which they were given, which is Pauline Christianity, of course. So it's important to remember that. The 3 points is that Europe was married with Pauline Christianity, which is adopted pagan ideas. Secondly, the introduction of science, the spread of science, the Enlightenment period, the Industrial Revolution, these all hugely contributed to the end of faith, or the twilight of atheism in Europe. This is very important to remember. And then and it's interesting also to remember is that after the Industrial Revolution had basically ended, which was about 1840, different dates, different historians say, but it's interesting to remember that the Promised Messiah, of course, was born around in 1835, around this period. So the Enlightenment had happened, the Industrial Revolution had taken place, all these different ideas, the philosophies had basically got strong roots, and that's when the Promised Messiah ﷺ came in the East. Now I'm going to talk about the West. So you have lots of, basically what happened in the West is lots of philosophers, free thinkers started talking against the monarchy, the Christian monarchy, but also attacking the Bible, attacking the Torah, attacking the idea of God. And there were lots of philosophers. Like I said, look, Bertrand Russell talks about the philosophers he thinks which were the most important. You have A.N. Wilson in his God's Funeral talking about the philosophers he thinks were the most important. And there's lots of differing opinions of what philosopher was the most important, or who had the most effect, or whatever. But generally, there's basically a consensus of the most important philosophers out there. Some of them, of course, they start off with Copernicus, who was a scientist as well, Galileo, Francis Bacon, Descartes from France, Spinoza, John Locke, of course, who's seen as the father of liberalism. And then coming to the 18th century, you had Jean Millet. Some of my pronunciations are not good at all. George Berkeley, Voltaire, David Hume, of course, Denis Diderot, Baron d'Holbach, Dolbach, and Nietzsche as well. So, there's lots of different philosophers. And what basically happened is that there's a huge change within Europe when people started attacking religion. And like I said, this was predominantly, the Promised Messiah Islam explains that this is predominantly because of Pauline Christianity. And of course, with the rise of the scientific evolution or revolution, there was a huge change. But if you just go a bit back, what you see is that the Christian church actually stopped scientific halt. The 17th century was still a backward atmosphere, and religion was halting science, and the church would ban any book which would go against the Bible. So for example, creationism was attacked, and even everyone knows about Galileo and his issues with the church and so on and so forth, where he had to actually denounce that he does not hold the opinion of Copernicus, which is that the sun is not in the center of the universe, which of course the Christian missionaries and the church was preaching. And actually, it's quite interesting because you had lots of people then coming forward in the background, philosophers, and talking against the Bible. So there was basically what happened was there was a backlash against Christianity in Europe. And that's the main thing. It may seem unfair that I'm talking about Christianity. There's, of course, lots of other things, lots and lots of factors which led to atheism, the Enlightenment, science, so on and so forth. But the issue, the predominant issue was actually Christianity, Pauline Christianity, because that's what all these free thinkers and these philosophers were actually attacking. And it's interesting to note these early philosophers like Voltaire, all these kind of people who came in France, and France was actually the hub where this was all happening. And of course, you had the French Revolution in the end, but they were actually deists. They actually believed in a God, and of course, they differed in what kind of God they believed in. Some said that God is nature, or there is a God, but he's just basically created the world and has left it as, you know, a toy which he doesn't interfere, meaning that God doesn't have any interference with the world. But they all believed in some kind of higher power, and they were actually, a lot of them were very devout Christians. Some of them were even Christian priests. But they started to question the Bible. Especially during the age of the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, which came forward. So, for example, Spinoza, it was a very famous philosopher who attacked the Torah, but also the Christian Bible as well, and he attacked it on ethics as well. There's lots of other, you know, philosophers as well, and this is all happening in the time of the Renaissance. Now, it's interesting to remember that during the time of the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, what was happening in Europe is that people were going out, the colonials, and they were discovering nations and continents and people, and, you know, actually classifying the history of people. So, for example, they went to India. They looked at the history of the Hindus there, of the different civilizations. They went to Egypt. They looked at the Egyptians and how they kind of worshipped and their cultures, and they would bring them back, and then these would be collated, and then later on you had the British Museum. And if you actually go to the British Museum, there's actually a whole section called the Enlightenment here in the UK, and you kind of see that what was happening, and it's actually written there somewhere as well, I recall reading, is they would bring back, for example, relics from Egypt, right? The Philosopher's Stone, all these kind of things. And they would classify them, and they would start, you know, looking at the history and what these kind of people believed. And they kind of made links with their own beliefs. So they would see that these previous people, the ancient people, they were worshipping the sun, they were worshipping different idols, so on and so forth. And they kind of drew parallels to their own faith, well, the predominant faith at that time, which was Christianity. And they were like, hang on a minute, these people were misinformed, but so are we. And these collections where they would explore different civilizations and draw similarities actually then, you know, also promoted a lot of people, a lot of philosophers to come forward and start attacking religion as well, especially, like I said, Christianity. Now, an interesting thing what happened is that, so these philosophers, what you have to remember is initially they would just talk amongst themselves, and this, of course, the church would ban books which would attack Christianity, attack the Bible, attack notions within religion. And these intellectuals basically started talking amongst themselves. For example, Baron d'Holbach, who was a French-German philosopher, he basically had a famous synagogue mansion. He's a very rich man in Paris. And Paris was actually the center of basically these thinkers coming together. People from the UK would come as well, Scottish philosophers, German philosophers. They would come, they would meet up, and they would talk against the Bible. They'll talk about philosophy. They'll talk about how there's more to just following a very strict way of life or understanding, just believing in creationism, and not exploring the world. And they talk against the monarchy, saying that science shouldn't be promoted, and they would go towards reason. And this is a key basically word when you read these books or read their writings, is that reason is basically God, that we can explain everything through reason. And I'm going to talk about how the Prophet Messiah explained reason. The Prophet Messiah wasn't against reason, but he explained how we should use reason. But anyway, he would go there, and an interesting thing, what happened was that during a discussion in Dolbach's mansion, which was called the synagogue, there were lots of philosophers there, and there was David Hume there as well. He was a great Scottish philosopher, and again who attacked religion as well. But he, of course, like I said, they believed in God, right? They were deists. They believed that God existed. And he actually said, whilst everyone was sitting, there was lots of them, and he said that that he did not believe in the existence of atheists, and that he had never seen any. And Dolbach replied by saying, "Count how many we are here." And in other narrations, that he said that there's 12 of us here. And for the first time, David Hume, for the first time, was shocked at that occasion. He said that, "I don't really think that there are any atheists, even though they were attacking Christianity, but they still believed and clung on to the concept of a God." And then Dolbach actually was saying, "Actually, we are atheists." So, and this is interesting because the Prophet ﷺ says that himself as well. He said that lots of people who try to prove God through just rationality are actually internally atheists themselves, or that it would lead them to atheism. And I'll, inshallah, talk about this later. Now, a huge name which lots of people would have heard is Voltaire. Now, Voltaire, again, he believed in God, right? He said that we feel that we are under the hand of an invisible being that is all. And he said that every work which shows us means and an end announces a workman. And basically his issue was with Christianity again. And he basically had a whole crusade against Christianity, writing lots of plays, poetries, and poems, and books attacking Christianity. And this is what was happening. So these philosophers were meeting with each other. They were talking against Christianity. They were talking against the notion of God, against religion. And then what happened is this started trickling down into poems, into the art of that time, which normal people would kind of, the message would go to normal people, the general populace, through these works, like poetry, plays, books, so on and so forth. And they would express their views, often in a very, very sly manner, so that the church wouldn't censor it, but they would give their views against the notion of God, against the notion of religion, why it's an issue. Now, Voltaire, for example, again, like I said, he had issue with Christianity. He said that attractiveness of atheism is directly dependent upon the corruption of Christian institutions. Reform those institutions, and plausibility of atheism is dramatically reduced. Again, the Prophet Messiah ﷺ said actually that Christianity ultimately results in atheism, and I'll talk about this later. Voltaire also said that each discovery in physics and astronomy revealed to us a new absurdity in this history of the creation. Again, going against creationism of the Bible, and you have the church suppressing science. You have these philosophers talking about science and saying that science is great. And of course, this kind of, if you like, revolution didn't happen with Islam. Muslim, great scientists actually pushed the world of science forward, on which the shoulders of which Western science and development rests on. So Islam didn't have this issue there, because of course we believe the Quran to be in line with the laws of nature and so on and so forth. And actually the laws of nature are guided through studying the Quran. But anyway, that's just a side note. Now, another thing which now, so there's another person called Jean Millet, and he again would attack Christianity. He said that if God is incomprehensible to man, it would seem rational never to think of him at all. He said on another occasion, he said that open your eyes, my dear friends, open your eyes. Your religion is not less or superstitious than any other. It is not less fake in its principles, nor less ridiculous and absurd in its dogmas and maxims. So again, they're attacking religion. They're telling people to think away from the Bible, away from religion. And like I said, this was because we have to remember that Europe at that time was a very suppressed society. The church had a lot of power. It would control. It would. It basically that's the issue, right? The state and the church were married together, and that's the issue that John Locke had as well. And this was basically a reaction, if you like, of that suppression, of that control, of that forcing religion upon people, not allowing people to think freely, not giving that freedom of religion, which Islam gave, of course, like Raha Fiddin, that there's no compulsion of religion. And these philosophers, they were basically a reaction to everything, that they were talking against the church. They would say that we need to promote science, we need to promote all these kind of things. And of course, the church would try to stamp this all out. Another thing which Jean Millier said is that there is a vast empire governed by a monarch whose conduct does but confound the minds of his subjects. He desires to be known, loved, respected, and obeyed, but never shows himself. This is God. Everything tends to make uncertain the notions which we are able to form about him. Again, the philosophers of these time, it's interesting because they would say that if God does exist, then he should show himself. God should be there. He doesn't talk. And of course, Christianity at that time, Pauline Christianity wasn't giving fresh science. It wasn't saying that, look, this is what God's doing, this is what God's doing, or this is a prophecy made, or this is how God has answered prayers, or so on and so forth. It was just all based on fairy tales of the past. And this is exactly what the Promised Messiah Islam came and counteracted, which I'll talk about in just a second. Now, one thing which we'll realize is when you look at the history and the origins of atheism, is, like I said before, you see France, French, Paris, liberté, philosophe, all these kind of terms being used. And these are basically because a lot of these philosophers were, meeting up. In France, you had Descartes, Voltaire, Jean Millier, Denis Diderot. You had Jean Rousseau and D'Holbach, all these kind of people coming together and talking against religion. Okay, so there's so many philosophers which I would like to talk about, but I don't think it's worth going into them deeply right now because of the shortage of time. Now, there's one philosopher in France. He basically wrote a very interesting dialogue, and the dialogue was called his dialogue between a priest and a dying man. And this became extremely controversial. And we have to remember, they would write these, they would spread them out, they would be banned by the church, they would be taken to the Bastille, which was the infamous prison, if you like, for these philosophers, where they would end up, and because they'd been blasphemous, right? They've spoken against the Bible or against what the Christian missionaries or the monarchies or the priests were preaching at the time. And it's interesting because you're seeing this kind of same direction within the Muslim world today as well. A prime example being Pakistan, where they're trying to control people's religion, labeling Ahmadis as a non-Muslim, so on and so forth. And so, anyways, coming back to France, you had this society there. So the dialogue between a priest and a dying man, it became very extremely controversial, and it was basically a written story of a priest trying to confirm the existence of God to a dying man who was an atheist, and was telling him to repent. And the dying man who was an atheist, he gives reasons. He's basically giving arguments against the reality of God or the existence of God, and the priest is trying to preach to him. And if you read the dialogue, the dying man actually destroys all the arguments of the priest for the existence of God. And this is how basically people were, reading these then, and they were digesting these things. They were like, you know what, maybe God doesn't exist. And so it's quite interesting because the dialogue, the priest asks the dying man to repent, and he then is shocked when the dying man wants to explain what he means by repenting. So the dying man says, okay, fine, I'll repent, but this is what I mean by repenting. The dying man tells the priest that he was created by nature with the strongest of passions, but surrendering to those passions, he's referring to sexual passions here, he did not fully use them. The dying man makes it clear that he repents to Mother Nature, not God, by saying he's sorry he did not sufficiently acknowledge the omnipotence of nature. So, and then he says, my remorse is directly solely against the modest use I made of those faculties, criminal in your eyes, but perfectly straightforward in my eyes. So this again was talking about the church and its control over, religious teachings about sexuality. So this is where the whole liberation or liberalism movements also started during this period of, it was actually on the shoulders of these philosophers. And these discussions kind of started where religion suppresses our freedom and so on and so forth. So, this dialogue was hugely criminal in France and was stamped out as well and banned and so on and so forth. And of course, then what happened is that these secret salons or discussion places increased, and there were lots of underground books. D'Holbach was infamous for his spread of books against the clergy, the monarchy, and they would really, it was basically a battle between the monarchy, the Christian monarchy, and these philosophers talking against the Christian monarchy, against Christianity, against Bible, against the notion of a God, and it would be a constant, like a tug of war, basically. And so yeah, you had the rise of these philosophers who were talking against religion throughout the 18th century and the 17th century as well, and it was basically trickling down to the point of the general populace was also kind of taking this on board, and there was this war between the cheap press and the general population. So it's interesting because at that time, of course, the press had developed, and the press at that time was only exclusive for the middle class, upper class, and only the very well educated or the rich people would read the newspapers. And these philosophers, basically, also in the UK, they started pushing cheap press and using cheap paper to get it out to people. And I'll talk about this in a second. But what basically happened in France is that all these people are talking against the church. The church is suppressing people even more. There were, the France was involved in other wars as well. And by the way, there's lots of these philosophers in the UK who had already come, like, David Hume, John Locke, and they were basically starting this liberalism or atheistic. Basically, they were starting these notions, which basically led to pure liberalism or atheism. But France is really the focus point because they were so concentrated there, and they had the biggest reaction, if you like. And that reaction happened with the French Revolution, which happened in 1789. So what happened in the French Revolution is that there was a huge attack against the monarchy, and the king was overthrown and forced to come down, and there was a huge attack against the Christian monarchy and against religion. the Bastille was attacked, which would hold these philosophers there, which would punish them, which would kill them at the stake, which would do all sorts of punishments. And basically, there was a huge de-Christianization within France, and that's following the French Revolution. The middle class, which was basically driving the economy, basically they wanted change, and they wanted basically all the wealth of the church to be taken away and basically redistributed, and because the church was holding so much power at that time. And this was a huge blow to the monarchy, because they were attacked, literally they were attacked with weapons by force, taken over. And there was basically this declaration drawn up, which Thomas Jefferson actually helped to draw up. It was called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. And this was drawn up by the National Assembly in August 1789. And this was basically, the declaration was actually resting on the shoulders of the ideas promoted by these free thinkers, by these philosophers. And it insisted on basing all future governmental decisions and laws not on religious ideals or on individual power and authority, rather on natural law. Now, the opening declaration states, the introduction states that representatives of the French people organized as a national assembly, believing that the ignorance, neglect, or contempt of the rights of man are the sole cause of public calamities and of the corruption of governments, have determined to set forth in solemn declaration the natural and sacred rights of man. So basically, what this declaration was saying is that we didn't have rights before. The French monarchy was oppressing us, and therefore we would like rights again. And like I said, there was a de-Christianization against the religion of Christianity, because what happened is that before this, the church was, for example, the largest owner of land, covering the expense of approximately 10% of the entire kingdom. And the religious clerics, they had a lot of money, and people like, if this is what religion is doing, then why is there a need for religion? So like I said, there was philosophical attacks on the theology, and there was attacks on the actual monarchy, the oppressive Christian monarchy, which was oppressing people and hoarding all the wealth and not giving those rights. And that's why you had this declaration. Following this, you actually had a reign of terror. And this actually started in 1793 to 1893. And we have to remember that the Promised Messiah Islam was, of course, alive at this time. And you had, for example, Robespierre, a huge name, Jacobin. All these people were actually using terror, force, against the Christian clergy. They were shutting down churches. Churches were being made into temples of reason. They were saying that all priests, they had to be, killed or taken away. There was literally a huge anti-Christian, anti-religious push, which happened in France following the revolution. And the Times actually famously reported to saying, following the era of the revolution, that the French were loose from all restraints and in many instances more ferocious than wolves and tigers, meaning that the exact oppression which the church was using, now those who opposed the church, opposed religion, were actually using the same oppression back. And these people, you have to remember, the philosophers who came during the revolution, post-revolution, were actually more extreme than the previous ones, like Voltaire. They didn't believe in God at all. So like the Prophet Messiah Islam says, he said that Christianity will eventually lead to pure atheism, and a false religion will lead you to pure atheism. And this is exactly what we were seeing in the history of atheism in Europe, that you had lots of discussions against Christianity, and this actually resulted in lots of revolutions, the French Revolution being the prime one. And then philosophers coming out and being pure atheists and saying that no, God does not exist and reason and nature are the way forward. And that's exactly what we saw. For example, in one instance, a committee reported that after the revolution, French Revolution, where you had de-Christianization, attacks on the church, the closing down of churches, they said that we have no more superstitions. We have no more superstitions, no more prejudice, no more churches. And the peak of this actually was, for me, the Temple of Reason and the basically the Festival of Reason. And this took place in 1973, and it was when the Notre Dame Cathedral, a very famous cathedral, very important historically cathedral, held the Festival of Reason, and was now made into the Temple of Philosophy. And during this festival, what happened was the goddess of reason was worshipped, and people took reason to be the new god. And this is what you see in the writings of these philosophers and thinkers as well. They would say that we have a god. That god is reason, our intellect. That god is the study of nature. So the God who we believe in, a God who exists, who expresses himself, people didn't believe in this. Because, of course, Christianity, Pauline Christianity, didn't provide this to them. It wasn't there. Europe was never married to a true religion of Allah, a pure religion of Allah. That's basically the essence of this talk. And then you have basically them French coming, Napoleon then bringing back religion or helping the monarchy, if you like. And then there was this basically, self-acclaimed leadership by Napoleon. He stopped the de-Christianization and basically supported the church again. But the remnants of the revolution, the ideals of the revolution remained. And this actually then boiled over to different countries. Again, like I said, in the UK, there was lots of French philosophers were influenced by David Hume or by John Locke, John Stuart Mill. And these ideas progressed, and anti-religious sentiments, anti-Christian sentiments basically seeped throughout Europe. And of course, this happened in the UK as well. A famous poem, Queen Mab, by Percy Shelley, lots of people would have read that, was actually a prime example of how people were against religion. And these people weren't actually religious, but they were actually going against the concept of God. So they weren't going against just religion, but the concept of God as well. And this influenced the French Revolution, influenced so many people in Britain as well. And so this is the Queen Mab, or if you like, by Percy Shelley. Percy Shelley was an 18-year-old. He got an admission through to Oxford University. Of course, Oxford University at the time in 1811 was very, very Christian and based on Christianity. And basically, he published a pamphlet, if you like, and it was called The Necessity of Atheism. And this got him expelled from the university, but and was actually told to disown the pamphlet, and then he could be allowed back. But he didn't do this. He refused to disown the pamphlet, and he actually called himself a Christian, but he went against the concept of atheism. Against the concept of God. So he states the evidence of the senses. He says, if the deity should appear to us, if he should convince our senses of his existence, this revelation would necessarily command belief. So this is so important. Ahmadis will relate to this. The evidence of the senses, he says, if the deity should appear to us, if he should convince our senses of his existence, this revelation would necessarily command belief. So he's saying if there's revelation through, we see God, right? We experience God, our senses experience God, then this would result in belief. Those to whom the deity has thus appeared have the strongest conviction of his existence. But the God of the theologians is incapable of local visibility. So he's saying that this does happen, right? And this happened to the great prophets. But the theologians, the priests, are telling us that God doesn't reveal himself locally. And this is exactly what's happening in the Muslim world now as well. They've said, the ulama have said, that God doesn't reveal himself anymore. He doesn't give revelation anymore. He doesn't talk to people anymore. Now he's deaf, dumb, and blind. And this is exactly what the promised Messiah opposed. And this is why, in my view, that these philosophers wouldn't have gone to atheism if they had seen the teachings of the promised Messiah, if Ahmadi was revealed to them, the true form of Islam. Because that's what they're saying. They're saying that there's no evidence of God, and the priests are telling us that God can't talk to you, right? And he doesn't talk anymore. He doesn't give revelation. That's exactly what Muslim scholars are saying today as well. And that's what Percy Shelley was saying, that the God of the theologians is incapable of local visibility, i.e., the normal people can't see him. And again, so he was of course there was a lot of pushback against him. He said that God is an hypothesis and as such stands in need of proof. The onus of probandi, i.e., the burden of proof, rests on the theist. And to be honest, we can agree with this. God is a hypothesis and needs proof. Yeah, we have to prove God in a way, and even if it's not to others, it's for ourselves. We have to find God, and the theist must prove this, and that's exactly what the promised Messiah Islam did, which I'll talk about later. Okay, I'm not sure how we're doing for time. How much time do I have?
You have another 8 to 10 minutes max.
Okay. So I'm going to forward now to the Promised Messiah Islam. So we've looked. These philosophers, they all came during the 17th century, the 18th century as well. Before that as well, during the 16th century, they're all talking against the Christianity, the monarchy, the suppression of religion, and they're talking about the lack of evidence for God. Right? They're not just saying, and lots of them were believing in God, but they just didn't believe in Christianity, and they left Christianity. And these things basically trickled to the wider society as well. The fall of the Christian monarchies as well, the suppression of the Christian monarchies, all added to the origins of atheism. People were introduced in Europe to Pauline Christianity, which was totally dismantled by these philosophers as well. The Promised Messiah Islam came, dismantled it even further, and spoke about its issues. But the Promised Messiah Islam came and he did something which no one else has ever done. And he literally gave the answer to these philosophers. The philosophers were saying that there needs to be local visibility of God. We have to experience God. Why are these theologians telling us that God can't speak to us? That clearly means he doesn't exist. And reason is the way forward, and study of nature and science is the way forward. And the Promised Messiah Islam said that this is, he said he came to the table and he said, here you go. Here is the existence of God. Come to Qadian, live with me for a bit, and you will see the existence of God. He proved that the Holy Quran is a book which takes one to God. It doesn't take one to a God who doesn't speak. The Holy Quran doesn't take someone to a God who doesn't listen. Rather, like we said, Allah said that Inni Qareeb, I am close. Ujibu, I answer the prayer of the supplicant. And the Promised Messiah, that's why so many people, Muslim scholars, they actually went on to say that we accept the Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi Islam because the world of Islam was saying that Allah is dead. Allah doesn't talk. But Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi Islam explained that God does talk. And a very interesting thing which the Promised Messiah Islam said, that he said, and this is really, really the crux of how he understood what was happening in the world as well. He said that what Christianity, basically he says that, I'm just trying to find the quote. trap. If you bear with me. So basically what the Prophet Islam says, that those people who get fed up by Christianity, and this was happening, right? They end up in the net of the philosophers. And this is exactly what we saw, right? That the people started leaving Christianity even today. And what do people say? That they base all their ideals and ideas on the philosophers who spoke against religion. And that's what the Prophet Messiah Islam said, that this was going to happen. And then he spoke about science, and he said that science isn't at odds with religion, and he said that Christianity has finished in the face of science, but Islam, he said that right now there's a battle between science and religion. Christianity is a weak faith. That is why it quickly crumbles when confronted by science, but Islam is strong and will overcome it, i.e. science, God willing. So the Prophet Messiah Islam, he said that Islam won't fall in the face of science. And he said, very interestingly, lots of people know that the Prophet Messiah Islam said that the Dajjal was actually the Christian Pauline faith, which came to the world of Islam as well, and did actually bring Muslims away from their religion and deceive people. Now, what the Prophet Messiah Islam said here also, he said that atheism is also the Dajjal. And of course, he battled that through living signs of the existence of God. And he also went into the theological arguments, of course, which basically the Brahmo Samajists were making. So the Brahmo Samajists, a group of Indian Hindus, they were basically trying to prove God, saying that God exists through rationality. And the Promised Messiah ﷺ said that you can't prove God through rationality alone and reason, and you have to prove God through the guidance of revelation. So the Prophet Messiah famously said that reason is blind without the light of revelation, right? Basically, in a nutshell. And he said that reason will take you to the point where we can all see that God should exist, but it doesn't take you to certainty that God does exist 100%. The Prophet Messiah, I'd just like to read out some quotes just to end off. The Prophet Messiah is due to the shortage of time, but I would love to have spoken at length about what the Prophet Messiah Islam did to counteract it, but I just wanted to put it in a nutshell without going too deep into it and running out of time. He says that there are countless mysteries in the path of divine cognition that cannot be discovered by man's weak and murky reason and rational ability on account of its own utter frailty. Can never ascertain the heights of divine mysteries. Basically, he's saying reason alone can never take you to understanding the true nature of God. Ilham, or revelation, is required. He said that this is the reason why the unsubstantiated discourses of mere intellectuals have never attracted the attention of anyone to the hereafter with certainty. Their listeners continue to think that, as the orator was speaking out of conjecture, they could oppose him with their own conjectures, as neither side had witnessed the reality at the sight. This is the reason why, when some intellectuals express themselves in support of the existence of God, other intellectuals opposed them and wrote books in support of atheism. So it's a constant battle. Even today, there's lots of Muslims trying to prove God through reason alone, through science alone, or through logic and philosophy alone. But the Prophet Messiah Islam said that the same arguments will be pushed back by atheists, and that's what's happening. And there's basically a kind of a stalemate, if you like. And the Promised Messiah is the one who brought something to the table which no one in the Muslim world has ever brought since the time of the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and that is revelation, the acceptance of prayers, experiencing God, seeing God through revelation. And that's what the Prophet Messiah ﷺ said, that this can all take you, philosophy and rationality, all take you to the point where God should exist. But atheists would argue against that. But the next step of certainty can only come through revelation. And that's why he was someone who can never be he can never be confronted, if you like, in the world of atheism, because he actually gave the concrete proof, which people like Voltaire, all these kind of people were asking for. And they were saying that we want to know God, we want to see God, show us God. The Prophet Messiah famously said that the rationalists have wooden feet, and wooden feet are very weak indeed. He said that it should be borne in mind here that the ideas based solely on reason suffer not only from the defect that they fall short of the stages of certainty and cannot comprehend the finer points of theological matters, but they also suffer from another defect, namely that discourses based solely upon reason are largely ineffective and futile in persuading the heart. The explanation of their ineffectiveness is that for any discourse to impact the heart, it is necessary that its truth should be so well established in the mind of the listener that he should not be left with any room for doubt, and he should believe from the depth of his heart that what he is being told is not susceptible to any possibility of error. He said that do not be deceived by thinking that if the consequence of following mere reason is atheism, then why do the Brahmo Samajists still have some faith in the existence of God, and why do they not become his deniers? There are two reasons for this, he says. The first is that they have not yet achieved the full progression of their ideas, and they are holding on to the belief in that being who is the internal product of their hypothetical reasoning. They have not yet stepped forward to search for the actual existence of that hypothetical being somewhere externally. But bear in mind that as soon as they progress in their ideas, the first effect of their progression will be a rankling with their minds as to where and in which direction that being is, whom they believe to be self-subsisting, all-sustaining, omnipresent, and that if he really does have a physical existence externally, then why is he not found, and why does he not reveal his being to those who are searching for him? So the Prophet is saying that those people who try to prove God through reason alone, again, the philosophers were doing this, that reason is the God, and then you had lots of Muslims trying to prove Brahmo Samajists as well, Muslims as well, like Sir Sayyid, just focusing on reason alone. And the Prophet Messiah said that when they actually delve out, they will actually also be trapped in these questions which atheists give, that where is God? So he said, the point which I'm trying to make here, just as an ending note, is the Prophet Messiah gave something to the world which no one has ever seen before, and that is the point, the explanation that reason is good, but reason alone cannot prove God. Following reason alone will actually lead to atheism, and revelation, or having a true connection with Allah, is the only way, like he said, to convince the heart. Deep down, if someone's arguing through just a purely rational point of view, deep down, if they haven't experienced Allah, if they haven't spoken to Allah, Allah hasn't spoken to them, if they haven't had a form of connection with Allah, then that's a very, very shaky bridge to walk upon, which the Prophet Messiah said. So I'm going to end here. There's lots of quotes of the Prophet Messiah which I would have loved to have read, but yeah, I'm sorry if it was rushed, because it's such a deep and very long subject. But like I said, if you'd like to read further, then the books I mentioned in the beginning will inshallah suffice for you. And those who want to read about what the Prophet Messiah said, definitely read Barahine Ahmadiyya Volume 3 and Volume 4 especially. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah, Murrabi Sahib, for an informative and enlightening lecture. You embedded the historical references. We have one question from Khalid Safi Sahib. He's talking about the Europe was always in darkness and never had a prophet. But the Holy Quran teaches that, and for every people there is a messenger, chapter 10, verse 48. Could you just please explain that?
Yeah, sure. So basically, that quote still doesn't go against what the Prophet Messiah alayhi salatu wasalam said. Yes, for every people there was a messenger, right? For every and again at that time as well, there were messengers, there were lots of messengers for just a locality. Of course, at that time the world wasn't a global village. You would only travel a certain amount, you stay within your tribe. And so yeah, throughout history there have been messengers who have come. Right now we can't locate them, we can't name them, we don't have their writings or so on. We can only just name a few, which I mentioned in the Holy Quran, of course, in religious texts. But the concept which the Prophet Messiah والسلام, was explaining is that the whole of Europe has been shrouded in darkness throughout its history, right? And that darkness actually starts from the time of the Roman Empire and then going as one religion, right? Because Europe adopted or accepted Christianity. And the Prophet Messiah ﷺ said that that's why in the hadith it is mentioned that the sun will rise from the west and this darkness will then diminish through Islam. And the Europeans have never been given a true religion of Allah, an overall religion which we talk about, i.e. the Judaism, Christianity, true Christianity, and of course, first and foremost, Islam. And that's the concept which he's trying to, which he spoke about.
Jazakallah for that. I think time is catching on us, so would like now hand over to our respected Secretary Talim UK, Nadimur Rahman Sahib, for any closing comments.
Jazakallah Shakir Sahib and Murrabi Sahib. I would like to just thank all our viewers, as per usual, coming and listening and viewing what's going on. Allah bless you all. And I would also like to thank you, Murrabi Sahib, taking the time out of your busy schedule and coming on our platform to educate our viewers. If I could humbly request you to lead us in silent prayer so we can conclude the session, please, today.
Yeah, sure. Dua. Ameen.
Amin. Amin. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.